Let me tell you something strange about people who don't like receiving visitors. We live in a world that values hospitality, an open door, a sofa always available. Maybe you're one of those who feels a pang in their chest when someone announces they're coming over. And maybe no one has ever explained to you why this discomfort, which seems so antisocial, is actually something else entirely. If you want to understand what you're feeling without labels and have the language to explain yourself without justifying yourself, stay until the end. Here, we translate psychology into relief, not diagnosis. Because there are people who need words to name what they've always felt but never knew how to say out loud. Perhaps you've already felt selfish because of this, or cold, or overly reserved. But what if there's an explanation that reconnects you with yourself instead of pushing you further away? What if this discomfort isn't about people, but about the space you're protecting? The world calls this antisocial behavior, coldness, disinterest in others. But what if it's precisely the opposite? What if disliking receiving visitors is a silent form of self-knowledge, of energetic protection, of clarity about where the public ends and the sacred begins? Because there are people who don't close the door to others. They close it to protect themselves. Who understand that home is not a stage, not a showcase, not an extension of social performance. It's a refuge. It's the only place where you don't have to translate your own weariness into sympathy. And perhaps that's not selfishness. Perhaps it's a rare form of inner congruence, knowing what is yours and protecting it delicately, even if the world calls you distant. There's a difference between liking people and needing them to break through your silence. You can love someone deeply and still prefer to meet that person outside the home, not out of rejection, but because within those walls, you can finally stop being functional, and that's too precious to be interrupted. Think about it. How many versions of you exist out there? The professional version that smiles even when tired, the social version that fills awkward silences, the family version that performs affection even when empty, and home should be the place where none of these versions need to exist. But when someone rings the doorbell, all those masks come back on. You hastily tidy the sofa, hide the dirty dishes, fix your hair. Suddenly, you're back on stage, only in a space that should be the only one where you can leave the stage. Some people need home to be a place where their body can sprawl on the sofa without looking sloppy, where silence doesn't need explaining, where you can cry, sleep during the day, do nothing. And that's legitimate, not laziness. And a visit, however well-intentioned, breaks that spell. Not because the person is bad, but because their presence demands that you become someone else again. And sometimes you simply don't have the energy to be anyone other than yourself. In collapse, in silence, at rest. We live in a culture that rewards hospitality as the highest virtue, where welcoming is synonymous with generosity and closing the door seems like emotional pettiness. An open house has become synonymous with an open heart. But perhaps the real problem lies in this, the need to transform your sanctuary into a performance space. Because when someone comes to you, there's an invisible demand. You need to be emotionally available, organize the space, sustain the conversation, manage the time. Even if no one explicitly asks for it, the expectation is there. And for some people, that's not lightness. It's exhaustion disguised as courtesy. There's a silent pressure for everyone to be natural hosts, for the house to always be presentable, for tiredness to never be a sufficient excuse. But some people need their home to be a place where nothing needs to be presented. Where a wrinkled sofa isn't sloppiness, it's evidence that someone finally got to rest. And perhaps this isn't about liking or disliking people. It's about protecting the only space where you can still be invisible, where no one watches you, judges you, or asks anything of you, where you exist without needing to explain your own existence. There's something about spaces that we rarely discuss. They absorb energy, not in a mystical sense, though perhaps that too, but in the sense that each environment carries the emotions that have been experienced there. And home, for some people, needs to be the place where only their own emotions matter. When someone enters, they bring with them expectations, moods, needs, and however subtle it may be, you feel it. You feel that person's energy occupying the space you were using to recover. You feel the demand for attention, even when nothing is said. It's not that you don't like the person, it's that you needed that empty space to process your day, your tiredness, your existence. And now there's someone there, and you need to share, not physical space, but emotional space. For some people, this is natural. For others, it's invasive. And there's nothing wrong with being the latter type. There's nothing wrong with needing your home to be exclusively your territory, where no other frequency interferes with yours. Psychologists call this the need for psychological ownership. It's the ability to create healthy boundaries between the self and the world, to distinguish what is public from what is private. In other words, it's knowing that not everything about you needs to be accessible, and that protecting that isn't selfishness, it's emotional survival. Some people need a place where no masks are necessary, where the body can be tired without seeming rude, where silence doesn't need to be filled with idle chatter. And when someone enters that space, however beloved they may be, there's a break in that intimacy with oneself. It's not about rejecting the other person. It's about preserving the only place where you can still rediscover yourself. Because out there, you're already performing all the time. At work, on the street, on social media, even in social gatherings. Home is where you can finally stop pretending you're okay when you're not. This isn't escapism. It's emotional discipline. It's recognizing that you have a limit, and that respecting it is the only way to remain present in the world without dissolving into it. And there's another layer to this. The issue of control. When you leave home to meet someone, you choose when to arrive and when to leave. You manage your own availability. But when someone comes to you, you lose some of that control. You become a hostage to the duration of the visit, the other person's mood, the energy the situation demands. It might sound silly, but for some people, this is crucial. Because the world is already full of situations where you have no control. The boss interrupting you, the traffic delaying you, the news overwhelming you. And home was supposed to be the only place where you set the rules, the pace, the emotional temperature. When someone rings the doorbell unannounced, or even after announcing it, there's a feeling of invasion. Not because you hate the person, but because they've brought the world inside, with all its demands, expectations, and unpredictability. And you were just trying to hide from the world for a few hours. This doesn't make you controlling. It makes you someone who knows they need predictability in a space where the rest of life is chaos. And recognizing that is an act of maturity, not rigidity. But of course, this doesn't always come from peace. Sometimes it comes from fear, from vulnerability, from thinking that if someone sees your messy house, they'll see you messy too. Sometimes it's about control, the attempt to hold the reins of a space when the rest of your life seems out of control. And that's okay, because even fear is a form of care. Even the need for control can be a legitimate attempt to avoid losing oneself. Not all protection stems from strength. Some stem from fragility. And both deserve respect. Some people don't open the door because they're tired of being strong, because at home, they can finally be vulnerable without being judged. And a visit, however well-intentioned, demands that you revert to being functional. It demands that you maintain a version of yourself that, at that moment, you simply don't have the energy to be. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you human. And acknowledging your limitations, even when they disappoint others, is a silent form of self-care that the world rarely teaches. There's something about the performativity of modern life that exacerbates all of this. Have you noticed how even the home has become content? How everyone posts about their organized living room, the set table, the Instagrammable corner? As if living were less about truly living and more about showing off that you live well. And when someone comes to visit you, even unconsciously, a comparison is happening. Your home is being measured against an invisible standard of cleanliness, of decoration, of lifestyle. And for some people, that's unbearable. Because a home shouldn't be a museum. It should be a nest. Some people simply don't want their home to become part of this game of appearances. They prefer it to remain imperfect, messy, honest, and for that very reason, out of reach of prying eyes. Not out of shame, but out of a refusal to turn intimacy into a performance. And perhaps this is, in fact, a silent political act, a way of resisting the culture of exhibition, of saying, there is a part of me that is not for sale, not on display, not available for validation, and it lives here, between these walls. Another point worth understanding. Some people process the world from the inside out. They need time alone to organize their thoughts, feel their emotions, and understand what happened during the day. You can't do that with someone sitting on the couch next to you, even in silence. Because the presence of another person changes the chemistry of the environment. You are no longer free to sigh, cry, laugh alone, talk to yourself. You are being observed, or you may be, and that is enough to disrupt the entire internal process. These people aren't closed off. They're introspective, and they need the physical space to reflect the inner space they're trying to create. When someone invades that space, even with good intentions, it's like interrupting a dialogue you were having with yourself, and resuming that dialogue afterward is almost impossible. So no, it's not a whim. It's not fussiness. It's a legitimate need to process life in an environment where no other voice, no other gaze, no other presence interferes in this process that is so intimate and so essential. Avoiding visitors isn't isolation. It's mental hygiene. Protecting your home isn't coldness. It's inner congruence. Preferring meetings outside the home isn't rejection. It's the clarity that you need a place where you don't have to be anything other than yourself. Some people love deeply, but need that love to happen in neutral territory, where the encounter doesn't invade their refuge, where the presence of the other doesn't mean the absence of oneself. And perhaps that's one of the most honest ways to relate, without sacrificing one's own ground. Refusing a visit isn't refusing the person. It's refusing the performance demands that come with it. It's saying, I love you, but I need to be with myself in here. And if you love me back, you'll understand that protecting this space is what allows me to be whole when I'm with you. Not all hospitality is generosity. Sometimes it's just fear of being misunderstood. And perhaps true generosity lies in being honest about what you can and cannot offer, even if it disappoints others' expectations. Think about the difference. When you arrange to meet someone at a cafe, you prepare yourself. You take a shower, choose your clothes, visualize the meeting. There's a ritual that puts you in the right emotional state. But when someone shows up at your door, you're caught off guard, and often you're simply not in the right state. It's not about the person being unwanted. It's about the timing being wrong, about you not being ready to transition from private to social mode. And this transition for some people isn't automatic. It requires time, energy, and preparation. Some people need this rite of passage. They need to leave home to assume a social role. And when the social role invades the home, there's a short circuit, because home was the place where that role could be shed. And now you have to put it on in a hurry, without time to prepare, without time to breathe. And this isn't being fussy. It's how your nervous system works. It's how you manage your energy. And respecting that isn't selfishness. It's profound self-awareness. There's also the question of time. When you're at home, you exist at your own pace. You wake up when your body tells you to, you eat when you're hungry, you rest when you need to. There's no social clock dictating when you should be alert, when you should smile, when you should be interesting. But when someone rings the doorbell, that rhythm is interrupted. Suddenly, you need to be awake, present, engaged, regardless of what your body was asking for at that moment. And for people who deeply respect their own internal rhythms, this is a subtle form of violence. It's not that you don't like company, it's that you need company to respect your time. And when it comes to you, it brings its own time, its own rhythm, and expects, even if silently, that you adjust to it. Preferring to meet outside the home, then, isn't about distance. It's about choosing environments where time is shared, not imposed, where no one is invading the other's space-time, but creating a third, neutral space where both can exist without one needing to adjust to the other's rhythm. This person tried, for years, to be the host everyone expected. They opened their home, made coffee, smiled even when exhausted. And at the end of each visit, I felt a strange emptiness, as if I had given away something I couldn't replace. When they finally accepted that they didn't need to do that, they realized that gatherings outside the home were lighter, more genuine, less performative, because there was no pressure to be the perfect host. There was no house being judged, no space being invaded, no energy being drained. There were just two people in a neutral place, with neither at an emotional disadvantage. And the relationships improved, because now there was honesty, because now there was respect for boundaries, for needs, for different ways of being in the world, and the people who truly loved that person understood. They understood that it wasn't about them. It was about the legitimate need to protect a sacred space. Those who didn't understand, well, perhaps they were never able to respect boundaries of any kind. And perhaps that was an important filter, separating those who truly love you from those who only like the idea of you, as long as you perform the way they are expected. Studies show that people with a high need for solitude tend to have greater emotional clarity and less dependence on external validation. They know who they are because they spend enough time with themselves to discover this. And home is the laboratory for this discovery. But the most beautiful thing isn't the theory. It's when someone finally allows themselves to exist the way they've always needed to, without guilt. When someone looks at their own need to protect their home and, instead of judging themselves, simply accepts it. This is how I function. And that's okay, because ultimately it's not about being unpleasant. It's about recognizing that you have a limited emotional supply, and that choosing where to spend it isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. Some people can only be present in the world because they have a place where they can be absent. And perhaps this is one of the hardest lessons to learn, that loving others doesn't mean giving up on yourself, that you can be generous and still protect what is yours, that it's not about performance, it's about reconnection. The truth is, there's an absurd social expectation that everyone should be an open-door person. That true friendship is measured by how often you allow the other person to invade your space. But what if that metric is wrong from the start? What if true friendship is precisely the opposite? Respecting that the other person needs a place where you are not. Understanding that love is not constant presence, but conscious presence, at the right times and places, not all the time. There's something profoundly liberating about having friends who understand this, who aren't offended when you say, "I'd rather meet you at a cafe," who don't interpret it as rejection, but as information, as important data about how you function, and which they respect because they respect you. And maybe we need to normalize this. Normalize the fact that not everyone needs to be a host, that not every house needs to be a hangout spot, that some people are generous, loving, and present, and still need their home to be a sanctuary, not a meeting place. There's a huge difference between chosen solitude and forced isolation. When you don't receive visitors because you don't want to, there's freedom in that. There's agency. You're in control of your own social life, deciding when, where, and how to connect with others. But when you don't receive visitors because you're afraid, ashamed, anxious, that's a different story. Then it might be important to investigate where that comes from, whether it's legitimate protection or escape, whether it's a preference or trauma. And it's okay if it's trauma. It's okay if you're protecting yourself because you've been violated before, judged before, disrespected before. That protection is valid, but perhaps it's worth understanding if that wall still serves you, or if it's become a prison. Because some people don't receive visitors because they love their solitude, and some people don't receive visitors because they're afraid of being seen. And it's important to know which is your case, not necessarily to change, but to choose, so that it's a decision, not an automatic pattern. It's not about shutting yourself off, it's about choosing when to open up. You can say, "I enjoy being with you, I just prefer it to be outside the house. In here, I need silence." That's not rejection, it's self-awareness. It's the ability to name a need without turning it into an excuse. There's a huge difference between avoiding people and protecting the space where you can finally stop being functional. Fear is one thing, clarity is another, and you have the right to know which is which, and to act accordingly. Perhaps you've never been allowed to say this out loud, but here it is. You don't need to turn your home into a stage. You don't need to be constantly available. You don't need to be hospitable to be loved. You can love deeply and still need that love to respect your space. That's congruence. It's aligning what you feel with what you do. And perhaps it's one of the quietest and bravest ways to take care of yourself. And look, there are people who will judge you for this, who will call you selfish, antisocial, cold, who will say that you are isolating yourself, that you are wasting your life, that you are closing yourself off to experiences. But these people probably never understood what it's like to need a place where nobody bothers you, where nobody expects anything from you, where you can finally exist without having to justify your own existence. And perhaps the greatest gift you can give yourself is to ignore those voices, to allow yourself to function the way you function, even if it disappoints expectations, even if it makes you seem strange in the eyes of those who have never needed to protect their own space. Because in the end, you're the one who will live with the consequences of sacrificing yourself to please others, no one else. So maybe it's worth being judged if it means remaining whole. There's something poetic about houses that don't receive visitors. They are honest. They don't need to be always tidy, always ready, always waiting. They can simply exist, like private temples where only one person knows the way. And perhaps that's what bothers others so much. The idea that someone has a place where they can't enter, where they aren't invited, where they can't give their opinion, observe, or participate. In a world where everything has become a showcase, having something that remains invisible is almost radical. But that's precisely what makes this space sacred. The fact that it's not for everyone, that not everyone has access to it, that you chose to keep it yours, untouched, intimate, even if it costs you misunderstandings, judgments, disappointments. And perhaps in the end, that's the greatest form of self-love, knowing that you're worth a space that doesn't need to be shared, that you deserve a place where no one else enters, where you are, finally, only yours. Not all absence is emptiness. Sometimes it's the place where the soul can breathe again. And perhaps not liking to receive visitors isn't about closing doors, but about protecting the only place where you can still be whole, unedited, without a mask. What part of you has the world never understood, but which, in silence, you have learned to respect? Perhaps it is precisely this, the need for a space that doesn't need to be shared to be real, that doesn't need to be seen to have value. If this video gave you the words to understand what you've always felt, subscribe. Here we talk about what the world never knew how to name, but you always felt, about the silences that are more honest than any explanation. And perhaps in the end, the greatest act of generosity isn't opening the door. It's knowing when to keep it closed, not out of coldness, but out of respect for what you still need to protect.